The coffee maker is snoring.
Valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are my shield. Though an army rise against me, you are my confidence, my rock, my redeemer, my mighty fortress. When the storm clears out, will be standing tall. You are the shield around me. You train these hands with war. I fear no evil. I fear no evil. I fear no evil. For you are my shield. I fear no evil. I fear no evil. I fear no evil. For you are my shield. I fear no evil. I fear no evil. I fear no evil. For you are my shield. Clears, I will be standing. You are the shield around me, and you train these hands for war.
So that was filmed in Lawton, Fort Sill, partly at least outside of the fort area outside of Great Plains. Museum of the Great Plains, and part of the movie Washington's Armor.
Cool.
So before we get started with our Midrash, let's. The scripture says, "You will eat and be satisfied. You will bless Adonai your God for the good land He has given you." So let's do that. Abba, we have eaten and we are satisfied. We thank you for the land. It's in Yeshua's name we thank you. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So our first verse, our order studying today was from Shemot. As we opened up this scroll of Shemot today, Exodus, or names. This is what we read. We actually read this additional section out of the Haftorah as well. Here's our readings for the Torah that we did. And this is, again, the first verse that JD read for us when we went to when we started our readings. You see the Eleh Shemot, the word Shemot there, the second word from the right on top is where our Torah portion names comes from. You see the interlinear there, Eleh Shemot, and these names, Bnei Israel, these essentially these are the names of the sons of Israel. All right. Were there any mitzvot in this portion? The answer is no. There were no mitzvot within this portion. There are none. There's not going to be any until Torah portion Bo, which is 2 portions from now.
What does bow mean?
Bo?
Not you.
Go.
Go! Yay. Get out of town. All right.
You don't have here.
So we'll start out with the the apparent conflict. Well, the conflict is, and you probably have seen some of this before. We're not going to really Midrash on this completely, but just kind of go over some of the highlights. At least look at it from a perspective of apologetics, perhaps. But if you look in your translations, in verse 5, they almost all will say 70 souls or 70 people. In the Chumash that I was reading from, it has a text note in that says the Septuagint and Acts 7:14 use it as 75. But we'll see that is true, but it's not completely true. So this is an apparent conflict with what Stephen said in Acts 7:14, where he says 75, but I don't think that 70 and 75 are actually in conflict with each other. All right.
Yeah, mine has a text note about the 70 and 75.
Okay. Well, here are some of the places where you see 70 and some places where you see 75. And the Targums and that was a test question for the fun
Challenge.
fun challenge, I think of the word. We see this also in the Samaritan Pentateuch as 70, but it's in 75 in the Septuagint, the LXX. Book of Jasher also says 70 souls. But the next slide shows that there are actually some more to go with. We get to witnesses in Hebrew for 75 souls. And the answer is yes. There are two places in the Dead Sea Scrolls where 75 is listed. 4Q Exodus B, also known as 4Q 13, as well as in 4Q Gen Exodus B. And they both say 75. And here's an example of the first one of those in terms of the context of it. And this is 4Q 13 or 4Q Exodus B is not a complete scroll. The dots on there show lacunae, or the holes in the text. But and you can see where it agrees and disagrees. It looks like it's a little bit out of. I think the picture is a little bit off, perhaps a little bit, but maybe okay. Well, in verse 5 is where it says, "All the souls who came out of Jacob were 75 souls, and Joseph was in Egypt already." Now, in the text of Joseph's in Egypt already, well, that is not necessarily, it's 75, but it's not in the section that's lying through is not in 4Q 13 or 4Q Exodus B, but 75 souls are listed there. And if you go to the next slide, this is from 4Q Genesis Exodus, also known as 4Q1, and that says 75. But here it says, and Joseph was in Egypt already. So there's two differing Hebrew texts on this. And in terms of age, or at least how old the actual texts are that we have, which is older, the ones that say 70 or the ones that say 75?
The ones that say 75.
Yeah, because the Dead Sea Scrolls are 1,000 years older than the earliest surviving Masoretic text. So the oldest ones actually say that. And if you look at it the other way, the oldest Greek text of the Septuagint also says 75. But the 70 versus 75 issue seems, well, when we get to it, we can see that it's going to be a little more like apples, and that can be considered to be apples and oranges, so to speak. So the question could come up in Acts 7:14 was Peter quoting from the Septuagint. Above it shows the Greek translation out of the New American Standard. It also says 75. Aramaic Peshitta text also says 75. But is it 70? Is there a conflict between 70 and 75? Well, if you go back to the Gospel of Luke, Luke 1:57-58, and looking at an Aramaic text of it in verse 58, he uses the phrase relatives, tuma, which is means relatives or family, not descendants. And whereas looking at in the Peshitta text of Acts 7:6, it says your seed, in other words, Zarah or descendants. And so Peter knew the difference between the two, between descendant and relative. So there's no conflict even between the Masoretic text and Acts 7:14. If you look at the difference, and it explained in the text note was that it's looking at more than just relative or more than just descendants, but relatives in Acts 7:14. So it's not really a conflict between the two. And so why is that an apologetics point? Well, what do you think?
Well, it's an apologetics point, number one, because you don't want it to give someone an open door to say, see, Scripture contradicts itself, can't be true.
Or saying, well, the New Testament is contradicting the Torah, and therefore whatever you're basing this on is not true.
Yeah.
But as we see, the oldest Hebrew text actually disagrees with the Masoretic text there. There are only these two places in Hebrew that they do, but they still are older than the oldest Masoretic text by 1,000 years, and the Greek text agrees with. So at some points in time, there have been, and we've talked about this a bit before, but there was at least two different Hebrew Torah texts, two different Hebrew traditions, because it doesn't seem likely that the Qumran community made up the 75, but if their source is the one that was used by the oldest translation of the Torah into Greek, well, that's the one they used in the show 75, because you can see that the rabbis who translated the Septuagint didn't make it up out of thin air. There's a Hebrew source text that they could definitely have used. Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense. So there was 75 relatives, because the Hebrews, they would bring all their family. They'd travel in packs.
Right.
And it explains to why they grew so fast in number.
Because it's very true that they were very, the Hebrew women were high producers, you could say, because they had a lot of kids. Sure. All right.
So there is no contradiction there.
There's no contradiction between the two, because one's explaining descendant and one's explaining relative. All right. The mystery of the Hebrew midwives. This is from verse 15. Now the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, Lamodot Ivrit, one who was named Shifra, and the second who was named Pua. Again, those were test questions on the fun challenge. Thank you, JD. So the comment. Now, this seems pretty odd for Hebrew midwives to have this unusual access to Pharaoh, would you say? How do you get to have access to Pharaoh if you're not even Egyptian, right? It seems potentially hard to get control. But what this, and they seem to be implicit in other words, they were trusted enough for Pharaoh to trust them to say that he's going to basically he wants you to murder the Hebrew boys. But the phrase that's translated as Hebrew midwives could be understood to mean midwives to the Hebrews, which in this context I think makes somewhat more sense. I think that they were not necessarily Hebrew midwives, but that they were midwives to the Hebrews who were Egyptians. But they're not really loyal to they're not really loyal to Pharaoh in the sense they were actively,
which is why it specifically mentions that they feared God.
Yes. Yeah. All right. I think I have a stray slide in here. This is just the Midrash slide. The mystery slide. Then you go to the next slide is where Targum Jonathan comments on this. Targum was also one of the test questions. There are a couple of different well-known Targumim, plural for Targum. Targum Jonathan, or sometimes called Pseudo Jonathan, Targum Onkelos, and the Jerusalem Targum. are also a well-known targumim from Aramaic into or Hebrew into Aramaic with commentary. And then here's what how the Targum translates and with commentary goes to verse 15. It says, therefore, you can see the Hebrew text above, or the English translation Hebrew above that. It says, therefore did Pharaoh, king of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, give counsel to the Yehudit midwives, the Jewish midwives. The name of one was Shifra, who is Yocheved, and the name of the other is Puvah, who is Miriam, her daughter. So according to the Targum, these two Hebrew midwives are none other than Yocheved and Miriam. So who's Yocheved and Miriam?
Mother and sister of Moshe.
Mother and sister of Moshe. Yeah. So that is how it's understood, at least by some, when Targum Jonathan was written, when the text was trying to be translated, when the Hebrews did not speak Hebrew very well, so they spoke Aramaic, and that's why this Targumim were read alongside Torah and Tanakh, Torah and prophets. All right. So going to the back, and there's the first part of that again, and then we go to what Rashi comments. Go to the next slide. Rashi comments that Shifra Yocheved. I think my Hebrew didn't show up really well on the slide here, so I probably need to fix that in the future. But the newborn infant she beautified, Mesheveret, the newborn infant, and that's taken from Rashi's comment is taken from the Targum. Okay, so continuing Rashi's comment. Okay, so the Hebrew didn't show up here well. Here it has the translation. Hua, saying is Miriam, because she cried and talked to and cooed the newborn infant in the manner of women who soothe the crying infant. This is expression of crying out, similar to like a travailing woman will I cry. This is Rashi commenting on Sotah 11b, again from the Babylonian Talmud. All right. Hebrew women are what? Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are skilled as midwives. When the midwife has already not come to them, they have already given birth. Well, a couple different translations there from Judaica Press, Complete Tanakh, and vigorous is how it's the New American Standard reads in there. And there's perhaps a better understanding that fits that on the next slide, the commentary from Rashi, is that not just vigorous, but they are compared to beasts in the field. They are not just vigorous, but they're like animals. So that their description in the commentary would probably fit Pharaoh's view of the Hebrews as being not quite to the same level of humanhood as the Egyptians. So this is my comment there. Of course, just like we talked about, in a lot of other places, what we're reading here in the Torah is a translation of a conversation that didn't occur in Hebrew, right? It's a conversation that occurred in Egyptian, not in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a translation of that.
By that statement, they were playing to Pharaoh's already thought of them.
His bad opinions
as their
of them.
defense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They were telling him what he wanted,
What he wanted to hear in their defense.
in their defense. And I mean, when you look at that is a really a primary step in what this is about. If you will, trying to play to Pharaoh's
Already prejudiced.
prejudice view of the Hebrews. Yeah, and this is I get it. They're animals, of course they do that. All right. So another short diversion here. Let's look at Exodus 1:15 from Targum Jonathan. Targum Jonathan actually names a couple of the chief magicians, Janus and Jambres. We add a J to it in a lot of English translations, that would be Janus and Jambres. He names those two magicians. Any thoughts on that? Where else do we see that?
Well, several places.
In the New Testament, right?
Yeah, you bet.
So it looks like Paul was familiar when he discusses this section and it was well known, the Targum at least, even though the Targum was probably written, this one was written probably after the Gospels were written, this particular Targum. The idea didn't originate obviously from the New Testament. This comes from ancient Hebrew sources, or in this case, Aramaic sources. All right. So next comes up is a bit of chronology. We're really not going to go into a lot of detail on this. You have some things on this, but I think most of you are familiar with the movie series Patterns of Evidence, and I think his the Exodus, the very first one, does a pretty good job of discussing chronology, and we'll talk a little bit about it just to have some background in it. But we could certainly spend hours discussing chronology here, and we'll probably get a little bit off track. So for those watching online, the next one's going to be a little bit hard to see because it's going to be a video. But again, I recommend taking a look at Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, the movie, available multiple places. This place. Might not.
Why not play?
I don't believe there was a single event that we can call the Exodus.
This person can't have seen all this. He imagined it.
So far, there's no documented evidence about the Exodus.
Exodus did not happen in the way that it is described in the text.
How can we prove that?
You look for a collapse in Egyptian civilization, and that's where you'll find Moses and the Exodus.
If we can prove there even was an Exodus.
If people are telling us that there was no Jericho at the time that Joshua conquered the Promised Land, and therefore Joshua is a piece of fiction, and therefore the conquest is a piece of fiction, why don't we ask the simple question, when was Jericho destroyed?
Do you think this is Joseph?
Either it is Joseph or it's somebody remarkably the same.
We have tombs that are clearly those of foreigners, Semites. We can tell this by the pottery, by the kind of weapons. These are non-Egyptian type daggers. They have donkeys in some cases buried with them. This was not an Egyptian practice.
This is real evidence for the time when the Israelites were in Egypt as slaves.
We were slaves? Why? I mean, if you're going to dream up a story, sure, you'd come up with a better one than that.
Look at your evidence and come to a conclusion based on the evidence.
Why is it that we've never heard of these findings?
Because in the scheme that's used by scholars to date all these events, they're way too early.
We may be wrong 10 years here, 10 years there, but there's no way, to shift centuries.
This would undo a lot of their books, wouldn't it?
Setting Moses' past. Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus.
So there's probably a couple slides, but so this is kind of a summary, if you will, of a couple of the views of chronology. The late Exodus chronology is majority opinion, and that was Dr. James Hoffmeyer was talking about that in that film. His primary source script for that is Shemot Exodus 1:11, where it mentions the city of Ramesses, and that city of Pi Ramesses only existed from 1275 to 1075. And so that's based on that text, Exodus or Shemot 1:11 is saying that it has to be a late Exodus chronology. Bryant Wood was also in that video snippet we just looked at. His view is based on 1 Kings 6:1, which places King Solomon's reign at 1446 BCE, which is derived from the destruction of the temple in later. And so this puts it at Exodus as 1446 BCE. Now, another view places it around 1650 BCE, which is Daniel Gregg's view, and we saw there's others that have that, and that nests well with Dr. Margaret Kenyon, who excavated Jericho and Hatzor, based on her timing of things, actually lines up well with an early Exodus chronology between about 1600 and 1650 BCE. And the city of Ramesses, in that view, is built on top of Avaris and indicates a Semitic occupation of that region. Ramesses is the later name for Avaris, based on where it was built on top of, and that accounts for Ramesses, the new name for an ancient place, Avaris. And so, if you go to the big problem of this is that with the late chronology, is that there's no archaeological evidence to support it. And if there's no evidence, it didn't really happen, or it was just a myth. And so the late chronology is only really based on the timing of that one city. There's no archaeological backing for that late chronology. Again, we're not going to go into a super amount of depth on this, but, and this is really the last chronology slide is up now, is that there are some evidences for an early chronology, which include the Ipuwer papyrus, which dates to 1800 BCE. And when you read it, the Ipuwer papyrus, and they go over it quite extensively in the video, but what it explains is, or really it kind of sounds like the 10 plagues falling on Egypt, but not from the biblical viewpoint, but from the victims, so to speak, the Egyptian wailing document that explains all the plague that happened to them. And it sounds quite similar to a time period that would be earlier than later, and some Egyptian view of what it might have sounded to be the Exodus. And so look at, what's the difference between 1800 BCE and 1650? Well, it's 150 years. But if you add in how many years was Exodus, it's not zero, right? So there is some time period there these time periods that date these things to are not necessarily, this particular date, but within a time period, circa this time period, something like that. Mm-hmm. There's also a stele, the Renafta stele, which is dated 1208 BCE, and in it, Israel is depicted as an established and powerful nation. So if it was it could be the middle chronology, the 1400 chronology, or the early chronology would fit that. But the 1208 BCE, if that stele is actually dated to that, Israel could not have been considered an established and powerful nation, because there's just not enough time window for that to happen if it's a 1250 or so Exodus. Anyway, that's just some short views of chronology. I think the majority scholarly view, I think, is incorrect on this. We see from the chronology that's shown in the video, Dr. David Roll, as well as from Daniel Gregg, looking at his chronology thing. It seems to me that it's an early chronology fits the archaeology and the text better than anything else. But again, a short view into chronology, we could literally spend hours arguing about it, fighting, if you will. We're just punching each other. Just kidding. All right. So moving on to the next is Asenat. Now, this next several slides, according to legend, this comes from a text called Ginsburg, or Ginsburg is author of the text called Legends of the Jews. And this next several slides talking about Asenat. Was she, in fact, a granddaughter of Yaakov, or Jacob? Here's what it says. When Simon and Levi massacred the men of Shechem, so you're familiar with that, we're all with that, right? Mm-hmm. Dinah, who is, of course, betrothed to Shechem, right? Dinah refused to leave the city and follow her brother, and saying, "Whither shall I carry my shame?" But Simon, her brother, swore that he would marry her, as he did later, according to legend. And when she died in Egypt, he took her body to the Holy Land and buried it there. Continuing to the next of this legend, Dinah bore her brother a son, and from her union with Shechem, the son of Hamor, she sprang a daughter, Asenat by name, afterward the wife of Joseph. When this daughter was born to Dinah, her brother, the sons of Jacob, wanted to kill her, or that the finger of men might not point at the fruit of her sin in her father's house. But Jacob took a piece of tin, inscribed the holy name upon it, and bound it upon the neck of the girl, and he put her under a thorn bush and abandoned her there. An angel carried the babe down to Egypt, where Potiphar adopted her as his child, and his wife was barren. For his wife was barren. Years later, when Joseph traveled through the land as viceroy, the maidens threw gifts at him. Asenat possessed nothing that would do as a present. Therefore, she took off the amulet, suspended it from her neck, and gave it to him. Thus Joseph became acquainted with her lineage, and he married her, seeing that she was not an Egyptian, but one connected with the house of Jacob through her mother.
Yeah.
So that would be a pretty close relationship then, if that's the case. Is that the only source? Is that the only source for this? Or is there another source that some people would hold to be biblical or close to biblical? Well, obviously I'm asking the question because there is another source for that, which is the book of Jasher, Sefer HaYashir, which reads, and Simeon his brother took his sister Dinah for a wife, and she bore unto him Menuel, Yamin, Ochad, Yachin, and Zochar, 5 sons. And afterward it came to Bunah, the Canaanite woman, same as Bunah, whom Simeon took captive from the city of Shechem. And Bunah was before Dinah and attended her, and Simeon came to her, and she bare him unto Saul. So the book of Jasher, where it talks about the Canaanite wife of Simeon, the book of Jasher doesn't refer to it as his sister Dinah, but one of the maidens from the city of Shechem that he took captive and married her. Anyway, those are some sources for that. Now it's these may or may not be accurate, but there is some view that legendary and according to the book of Jasher that this took place. It does seem, this is timing wise, this comes before giving of instructions in the Torah that says to not marry your sister, or to not marry two women. Like, for example, not to marry 2 sisters. It says that. So there's this is given before this probably happened before those instructions happened. Questions or comments on this? Well, strikes you as odd?
The legend. Remembering was just going, no. She wasn't the daughter of Potiphar. No.
Except because of her name, she might have been the daughter of Potiphar.
Potiphar, her name.
It specifically says that she was the daughter of a priest. And Potiphar was not a priest. He was probably closer to being a governor or prison warden. No.
Yeah.
He threw him in prison.
Right, but it also mentions later.
That was last time we were here.
Yes.
Okay, continuing. This is a bit of a backspace, so to speak, to we kind of mentioned this earlier, but high producers, the children of Israel were fruitful and swarmed and increased and became very, very strong. When Rashi and swarm, he translates that or understands to mean each birth was 6 children. My my comment, Rashi's comment seems pretty unlikely.
Silly Rashi.
It's not Rashi anyway. All right. So what about a new king? A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph.
Yeah.
The Targum, just like Targum says, there arose a new king, other than the one who was formerly over Mitzrayim, who took no knowledge of Joseph and walked not in his laws.
I had a thought about that because Egypt has a history of wiping out the past if it didn't want to agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if it wasn't just that he didn't know who Joseph was, it's he refused to remember who Joseph was.
It's possible.
So there's a number of comments that would look at this as being possibly the Hyksos dynasty. Hyksos typically is understood to mean foreign rulers. Josephus translated as shepherd kings. And the Hyksos dynasty reigned from about the same time as the early chronology of leaving Egypt.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of scholars that look at the Hyksos probably of multi-ethnic or Canaanite origins. And here's what, sometimes you don't use Wikipedia as a source, but just what Wikipedia says about it. It says, the Hyksos were shown wearing the cloaks of many colors associated with the mercenary Mitanni, bowmen, and cavalry, Ha'ibru, of northern Canaan, Aram, Kadesh, Sidon, and Tyre, which would be very close to be where Joseph's family was from.
Was that the king before, or was that the king during, or did Joseph's time, or Moses' time?
Yeah, see, that's the thing, though. It'd make more sense to me that when the Hyksos took power, that would be when somebody took power after they would be kicking out. But the timing is a little bit skewed for that to be the case.
Because when Moses left, the Pharaoh died in the water, and his son died of the spirit of death.
Here's the question: would it be more or less likely for Canaanites to be friendly to Hebrews, or for people who don't know them to be friendly to Hebrews? Historically speaking, there's been prior animosity between Canaanites and Hebrews in the land before this happened. So it might mean that even though they are linguistically similar, they might be already just predisposed to not liking them. So that's one way to look at it.
Except some of them did like them. So I mean, the whole thing with Shechem though might have terrified quite a few.
Or angered quite a few.
Yeah,
we know what you're like. You kill our countrymen.
One specific argument for the Hyksos being a Semitic people is because remember when Yaakov finally got there, Pharaoh said, "Please put your blessing upon me."
Yeah.
A non-Semitic person is probably unlikely to ask for that favor there.
Okay.
So
next slide shows something that some people look at as being similar to Hebraic pictograph here. This is the picture on the slide is from King Tut's portable tent with wooden beams overlaid with gold, winged creatures, outstretched wings on a door facing east. Tutankhamun stands for the living image of Amun, a god. But he changed his name from his original name. His original name was Tutankhamun, which means living image of Aten, who was his father was essentially tried to basically be a sun worshiper who had a single god named Aten. Aten was his name. But King Tut, after his father's death, restored the priesthood of the god Amun to being the primary one for primacy, and reversed the monotheism of his father, Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten. And continuing on that, Akhenaten means effective rod. After Tut's death, his advisor, married Tut's widow and became pharaoh for 4 years, and then lost the war with the Hittites. Tut's army commander, Horemheb, had been named Tut's heir, but he was out of the country when Tut died. After Ai's death, Horemheb seized the throne and removed all images of Akhenaten, Tut and Nefertiti, Tut's stepmother, and Ai. So perhaps another question is, could Horemheb be the new king who did not know Joseph, based on some of the iconography of Tut being similar to what the Hebrews used before, in probably the generation before them.
A few minutes ago, Denver made the comment, after almost 2 centuries, Yosef was forgotten. At least his Hebrew name was forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And Egyptian history would have remembered him only as an Egyptian minister by his Egyptian name.
Yeah, true point.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Considering how much things changed, it almost sounds like Tut could have been the king that decided to not remember Joseph.
Could.
But
There's a theory for
the
that.
timing on all this, though?
This.
How long ago was that?
It kind of depends on which chronology you're using. Whether Tut was before Moshe or Moshe was before Tut.
Yeah.
But the thing is Tut died young.
Mm-hmm.
How did he die?
Well, I think the mummy shows he was bludgeoned to death.
Oh.
So
he didn't die of drowning.
No, he died of a blunt instrument. He fell.
Phil and hit his head on a rock.
Repeatedly.
We don't speak ill of the dead, do we?
All right. So back to in 110, the text says, "Get ready, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they increase and war befall us, and they join our enemies and depart from the land." So dealing shrewdly, this is what Rashi's comment. Our rabbi, however, interpreted the Pharaoh said, "Let us deal shrewdly with the Savior of Israel," thus interpreting lo as to him. Here's where you see that in the next slide. Shows the text of that. The blue arrow is the word lo, which you see as to him. If you're looking at what would be to him, or to them rather, it's lehem. You see that below that. So it's a singular word there. It's to him, not to them. So let us deal shrewdly with him, which could refer to Moshe as the Savior of Israel. Unclear. But it'd be literally, it's to him, not to them, as in the Israelites. Okay, I think I must have a slide out of order here, but next slide is on chronology. This is archaeology of Jericho here. The places where it was, back from the 1930s, they estimated destruction of circa 1400, which is similar to the 1446 of the middle chronology. Catherine Kenyon estimated 1550 to 1580, which is the majority opinion today, which would put close to that the early chronology. And carbon dating of the grain supply showed the latest date of 1524 and an earliest date of 1601, which again would put it much closer to either the early chronology, which had 1650, or the late chronology or the middle chronology of 1446, but nowhere near the 1250 of most modern scholars.
Yeah.
Again, I think I have some slides got out of order here. The next slide talks about Janus and Jambres. It was answered to one of the questions, but Paul talks about it in 2 Timothy. And we saw that the Jasher quote named them as well. Apologize for sliding out of order here. You can say scatterbrained and it would probably be pretty accurate. All right, next up is chapter 2. So we're not going to spend the same amount of time on the other chapters, so we're not going to be here till that late. Rashi comments on this man in his house of Levi says, "Who was she?" Well, this is the part of the text and the tradition that it was literally that Moshe's mom literally was the daughter of Levi. a man of the house of Levi married a daughter of Levi. Rashi comment, for she too was transformed to become like a young woman physically, but she was actually 130 years old. She was born when they came to Egypt between the walls. And they stayed there 210 years. When they left, Moses was 80, and so when she conceived him, she was 130. Yet most scripture calls her a daughter of Levi.
Stretch for me.
Stretch.
Well,
What do you think he's
Taking
named
it
after?
literally.
Hmm?
He's taking it literally. Daughter of Levi. He's taking it literally, not the descendant
Mhm.
who's female. Like how? Like that's like literally taking the Pevensey children as literally the daughter or sons and daughters of sons of Adam
So,
and
daughters
daughters
of
of
Eve,
Eve.
yeah.
Maybe some from the line. Yeah, from the whole line of Jordan.
The thing is they're called the children of Israel. All the way down through history.
And
What is he thinking?
And we're all literally from the
Loins of
patriarch-
Israel,
the
they
patriarch
definitely were.
Yaakov. Yeah. So anyway, that's where you see the born between the walls, as it says.
I don't know. I think this guy with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Brush is always good to discuss. Okay,
Beating with the log of wood that's in his eye.
here's a comment from Chumash Bereshit, on the Kehot publication. The woman was conceived and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was good and hid him for 3 months. Our sages teach us this also means that Moses was born circumcised, indicating that his body contained no admixture of evil and therefore did not distract him from material or unholy sensual urges. Excuse me, he was thus left fit for his holy calling.
What?
From birth.
This version says, and she saw that he was beautiful.
Well, this is just a comment. What you just read there is not actually what the version says. This is just a comment from.
Got the commentary on it.
Yeah.
So, somebody different than Rashi said something as stupid as what Rashi said.
She saw that he was good and she hid him for 3 months. It's like, what mother wouldn't see their child as good?
Yeah.
Every mother thinks their child is perfect.
And
God said, when he made the earth, it is good. Just looked at everything and said, it is good.
Verse 3. When she could no longer hide him, she took for him a reed basket, smeared it with clay and pitch, pitched the child, placed the child into it, and put it into the marsh at the Nile's edge. The book of Jasher and the Talmud both say that Moshe was a preemie. She bore him after only 6 months and 1 day, according to Sota 12a. The book of Jasher says he was 7 months old. 7 months after conception. So.
Can neither confirm or deny that one way or the other.
Right.
I don't know. I know what the verse says. It says.
What is the Hebrew term for NICU?
It was like.
Sorry. 2:6.
3 months. 3 months.
How do they know? Well, obviously Moshe was already naturally circumcised, right? Or what? Now, if it is true that ancient Egypt did often practice circumcision, but the males were ages 11 to 12, not 8 days. Assuming that Moshe was circumcised on the 8th day or born naturally circumcised, as the commentators say. All right. So that's how they knew. Like, looking at everything, we know that this is not a Hebrew or an Egyptian baby because he's circumcised. All right. She named him Moshe.
Because in those days, the looks would not have been that different necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. In terms of
Except the Hebrews would have been more likely to have red hair than than the black of the Egyptians. Joseph was known to have red hair.
Well, Jacob's brother too.
It's reasonable. It's also reasonable to speculate that the cloth that she wrapped the boy in was from their own Hebrew cloth, not necessarily Egyptian linen.
Or that he was a Hebrew because the other women wouldn't be hiding their kids from being killed.
Right. So, yeah. The circumcision thing, argument, I mean, I guess it's neat, but
Could be any number of different things.
again, it's a stretch for me.
Well, I think that, I mean, I don't, there could be those other things, but I think that that's a the distinguishing characteristic of Hebrew babies is that they're circumcised.
Sure.
Okay, Exodus or Shemot 2:10, the child grew up and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter and he became like her son. She named him Moshe, and she said, for I drew him from the water. So Moshe would then be what kind of a name? An Egyptian name, right?
Egyptian name.
So there are other names of Moshe. You may have seen some of these before. This is taken from the book of Jasher again, Jasher 68, beginning at verse 24, where it says, she called him Moshe, named on water, and Amram, his father, called his name Chabar, for he said it was for him that he associated with his wife when he turned away. Again, what this is about is a tradition that in order to save the children, they got word of Pharaoh's intent to kill all the newborns. That Amram essentially divorced Yocheved, and so did all the Hebrew men, so that they would not let Pharaoh's prophecy or intent come true to kill all the babies. And this is from that tradition that says that it was because of being told about Moshe that he did again remarry his wife. Verse 26, and Yocheved, his mother, called his name Yekutiel, because she said, I have hoped for him to the Almighty, and Elohim restored him unto me. So restored from El. Miriam, his sister, called him Yeved, for she descended for him to the river to know what his end would be. Yeved or Jared means to descend. Verse 68:28, and Aaron, his brother, called his name Abizanuk, saying, my father left my mother and returned to her on his account. Kohat, the father of Amram, called his name Avigdor, meaning because on his account did Elohim repair the breach of the house of Yaakov, so they could no longer throw their male children into the water for drowning. Chapter 68, verse 30 of this says, and their nurse called him Avisoko, saying in his tabernacle was he hidden for 3 months, on account of the children of Ham, Egypt. And all Israel called his name Shemaiah, son of Nathanael, for they said, in his days has Elohim heard their cries and rescued them from their oppressors. So Nathanael means Yah hears, or son, or giver, or son of, given of El. Natan is the word for gift. If you say Shemaiah, you might recognize it as from the root word Shema.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Moshe killed the Egyptian. We saw that in the Hebrew text. I think I have some text cut off in the bottom of this, but the Targum kind of names some of the people involved here. Well, in this case, the Mitzrayite man struck a Jewish man, and Moshe turned to consider the wisdom of his mind and understood that in no generation would there arise a proselyte from the Mitzrayite, and so then he killed him and buried him in the sand. So my comment there is cut off. I apologize. Now, according to this is the text says, we're going to strike your friend, which Hebrews were fighting. According to the Targum, Jonathan, it was Dayton and Aviram who were the ones who were fighting with each other.
That's interesting.
According to tradition, after Moses fled and was sitting by the well, he sat there intentionally, for he expected to meet his mate, just as Jacob had met Rachel and Eliezer had met Rebekah when he sought a mate for Isaac. Or he was thirsty.
It's an interesting parallel.
Yeah, it is.
And there's no way to determine it until.
Yeah, it's one of those parallels that does make sense, whether you can prove it or not, I guess. But when they saw Moshe, they didn't think of him as a Hebrew, though, right? They said an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of shepherds. And so what Moshe did was essentially stand up. He stood up. He basically did exactly what Isaiah would later say. Learn to do good, seek justice, reprove the ruthless, defend the orphan, and plead for the widow. So they were essentially the ones who are defending those who could not defend themselves. That's what Moshe did there. He stood and delivered. Continuing on with this, Elohim remembered the covenant. Now, here's a kind of a question. It says Elohim heard the cry and Elohim remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. What do you think it means to remember the covenant? Do you think he forgot it?
No,
it seems unlikely that
he brought it to mind on purpose, and with the decision that now is the time.
Mm-hmm. I think your comment on timing is really on. This is about, he didn't remember the covenant, but he knew that the timing for it was now to bring Israel out of Egypt. That's what the Targum says. It says, after many of these days, and the king of Mitzrayim was struck with disease, he commanded to kill the firstborn sons of Israel, might bathe himself in their blood. And the sons of Israel groaned with the labor that was hard upon them. So this is adding stuff to the text about determining, what this king of Egypt was going to do. He wanted to heal himself by bathing in the blood of Israelite infants. Again,
like that's gonna look.
He's a pagan. So. All right, chapter 3. This is Art Scroll commentary. Talk a little bit about the name here. The preponderant name of God in this chapter is Elohim, the name that connotes strict justice, because it was about to judge Egypt for its excessive cruelty. In the three places where he reveals himself to Moses, verse 7 or 2, 4, and 7, however, it's called Hashem or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. The name of mercy to show that his primary intention is to save Israel in a historic demonstration of divine mercy. Here's how the ISR translates this. It says, the messenger of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked and saw the bush burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. So here's how the Geneva translation translates. The Geneva Bible says, the Geneva Bible note. So this shows that the church is not consumed by the fires of affliction, because God is in the midst of it. I think it's showing a doctrine that is putting a doctrine into the text here. It doesn't really show itself.
I think the only reason God the fire.
Yeah, he was the fire.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He was just demonstrating his power, going, I need your attention. Over here.
Yeah.
Looky here. Looky here. This bush naturally bursts into flame, but it ain't burning. Looky.
So there are a couple of traditions about what the flame of the fire was. One tradition from Jonathan is that it was an angel called Zag Nugael. Was the name of the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, or in Targums, Yud is the way to depict the divine name.
Is that why they called the candy bar the Zagnut?
No. Another tradition found in Midrash Shemot Rabbah says angel was Gabriel. John Gill, a commentator in the 1697 to 1771 time period, says this the angel messenger was none other than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as appears from Acts 7:32, was as the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, angel of divine presence, and of the covenant, an uncreated angel. So compare his comment with Acts 7:32, which is on the next slide from the King James translation. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire and a bush. When Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight, and as he drew near to it, the voice of the Lord came unto him, saying, I am the God of thy fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses trembled and durst not behold. Take a look at it. Continuing on with this, another view is that these words, remove your shoes from your feet, for this place is going to be holy ground, indicates the Shekinah. According to the Talmud, it says that this teaches that everywhere that the Shekinah or the Shekinah is revealed, it is forbidden to wear shoes. So remove your shoes from this presence. So those are views. According to the New Testament, it says it was the angel. I think that the comment from John Gill is somewhat on target, I guess, in that sense. Continuing on with Ayeh, Asher, Ayeh. And Moshe said to Elohim, see, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the Elohim of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So, I mean, was it forgotten? What did Moshe not know? Because the patriarchs knew that Yah's name was given to them as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, or Yahweh. The name was known to the patriarchs, but Moshe had to ask. When he's told, he is told that Ayeh was sent to you, or Ayeh has sent me to you, which some translate it as I will be what I will be. Others translate it as I am. See, Judaica Press Complete Tanakh translates Ayeh as I will be, denoting now and future. ISR looks at in verse 3:15. It says, Elohim said to further to Moshe, thus you are to say to the children of Israel, Yahweh Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, Elohim of Yitzhak, and Elohim of Yaakov sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is my remembrance to all generations. Yes.
Mine has a little bit of notation on the I am that I am. Mm-hmm. So why did God tell Moses to say I am has sent me, but then later say the Lord has sent me? The Hebrew words translated I am and the Lord are two forms derived from the same Hebrew verb. Mm-hmm. Though I am is not reused as a name of God in the Old Testament, the Lord is used more than 5,000 times. The phrase the Lord is a rendering of the Hebrew word Yahweh, or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, mm-hmm. that seems to mean he who is, or he who causes to be. Mm-hmm. The translation of God's name into English is a title rather than a personal name, in a way of showing reverence for him. It continues a tradition that predates Christianity as reflected in the New Testament. Acts 2:21. Mm-hmm. Jewish readers coming to the divine name in the text substitute the word Adonai, Lord, and the Masoretic scribes inserted the vowel sign, the vowel points for Adonai and the word Yahweh as a reminder. In some older English translations, Yahweh was rendered Jehovah, a form derived from combining the vowel sounds for Adonai with the consonants of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh.
I can verify that last thing that you just said, that they added the vowel pointers from Adonai to the Tetragrammaton. I have those notes in my Tikkun Sofrim, which is what a sofer uses to copy the Masoretic text. That is a true statement. Denver says Shemot 6:3 with a question mark. Not sure what else about that.
Well, let's take a quick look.
I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but I did not make my name Yahweh known to them.
Yeah. That's the question of is how do you express a question mark in biblical Hebrew?
Yeah.
Right?
Context.
Yeah. So
And even then,
it can also, I mean, the ISR.
Did I not?
Yeah. Did I not make myself known by that name?
Yeah.
Question mark. Did I not make myself known by that name? It can be the same way, depending on context, whether it's I did not make myself known or did I not make myself known in English. Anyway, the same way to same verb, same word order, but just as the context for it. Since I would argue that it's a question mark.
Oh,
because
mine actually has a note about it may have been a rhetorical question.
Because he did make himself known. Now, what a lot of the if you will, the scholars look at that and say it's the point on that phrase is on the word yada, to make myself known. Yada is to know, but it's the same word used for marriage. When Abraham knew his wife, that kind of intimate sort of knowledge is that they knew the name, but they did not know him intimately. That's what if you translate it as a sentence versus a question, or a statement versus a question, that's how it's understood to be. Is that I did not make myself known in the same way of of intimate knowledge I gave to Isaac, or question to Moshe, because we remember in the book of Devarim, it says that he knew, Moshe knew or saw knew Adonai face to face, which is a different level of intimacy that was known from the patriarchs.
Yeah.
Now, when it says "make myself my name forever," this is a rabbinic view of why not to pronounce the name. Is that the word forever, le'olam, you're very familiar with that word. The vav is deficient in the text. The vav is not there. In the full version has the word olam, le'olam. This version here, this text here has the vav missing. And so they say it's missing. We understand as le'olam, to conceal, meaning that the pronunciation of the way God's name is written is to be concealed, according to Talmud Bavli. Now, without going into a lot of detail, that's contradicted by other texts where rabbis are trying to teach the name of the Most High to their students. In other texts, you can see that. So the phrase here that means to conceal is not entirely even true within. If we look at the next level, rabbi teaching other rabbis or their students, it's not really exactly accurate. This is what might be said to the masses, but not what the rabbis are secretly teaching to their disciples, their talmidim. All right, chapter 4, we see a strange phrase, bridegroom of blood. Why? What is this about? Then Zipporah took a flint, cut off the foreskin of her son, cast it at Moshe's feet, and said, "Surely a bridegroom of blood you are to me." So he let him alone. Then she said, "A bridegroom of blood in regard of the circumcision."
Beit Milah.
It's a very strange sort of thing. I think there's some pieces that are not quite. They're not in the text to tell us exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And why would be in other words a death sentence. And so Rashi tries to fill in the blanks here with this. He says Moshe had neglected to circumcise his son Eliezer. Because he neglected, he was to be punished with death. It was taught in the Bereta. Rabbi Yossi said, "God forbid, Moses did not neglect it, but he reasoned, like, shall I circumcise him and go forth on the road? It shall be dangerous for the child for 3 days. Shall I circumcise him and wait 3 days?" Continuing, the Holy One, blessed is he, commanded him, "Go, return to Egypt." But Moses returned to Egypt, intending to circumcise Eliezer upon his return. Why then was he to be punished with death? Because first he busied himself with the details of his lodging. This appears in Tractate Nedarim. Continue on. The angel turned into a sort of serpent and swallowed him, Moshe, from his head to his thighs, and then spit him out, swallowed him from his feet to his private parts. Zipporah therefore understood that it was because of the failure to perform circumcision this occurred. She cast it before to Moses' feet, and you were a cause of that my bridegroom would almost be murdered. You are to me the slayer of my bridegroom. So he released Moshe, and she understood that it was because of the circumcision that he had come to slay him. So she said, a bridegroom of blood concerning circumcision, my bridegroom would have been murdered because of the circumcision. This is the circumcision here is the noun, and the lamed serves as an expression meaning concerning, similar to Pharaoh would say concerning the children of Israel, of lebene, to the children of Israel. Onkelos, however, translates this lamim, damim, as referring to the blood of circumcision. We recognize the word dam as blood. So a later rabbi says, although failure to perform a circumcision does not incur the death penalty, the most righteous people, such as Moses, are held to a higher standard of divine accountability. So a bunch of different things coming together there to try and explain what is not actually in the text about why this phrase of bridegroom of blood comes about.
Cece said, I think she just understood Moshe had a V. Not sure what that means.
A V.
Yeah, a lowercase v here. I'm not sure. Cece, if you could clarify just a little bit, and we'll come back to it. Takes about 2 minutes, I think, to get a comment.
Not completely responsive.
I have a thought on what actually was going on. It's the man's job to do the circumcision, and he had not done it when he was supposed to, and had not fulfilled his duty, forcing her to do it instead.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, he caused her to have to hurt the children.
Yeah.
She had to draw blood.
So she said, think she understood Moshe had failed to do the circumcision, so she stepped in and did it to save Moshe as well as her son. That's what she clarified.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she called him a bridegroom of blood because she was forced to cause her children to bleed.
It's not. Yeah, well, that's a decent explanation. I think it's you get a lot. So many times, something bad happens, they try to justify it and figure out why the bad thing happened, and they'll step in and do something that maybe wasn't necessarily what you needed to do. For example, my wife wants me to put up some curtains in her office, and I haven't done it. So what does she do? Gets out the hammer and nails and starts putting up curtains. You understand what I'm saying? So, I'm not saying that's exactly the same thing here, but
yeah,
she perhaps didn't need to do that.
Well, the thing is death was. It said he was threatened with deaths. I mean,
right.
So she did it to save everybody's life, and but she threw it at his feet, going, "You're a bridegroom of blood to me because you made me do this.
Right.
You made me hurt, cause my children to bleed.
See what you made me do."
Yep, exactly. Women have been saying that for a long time. See what you made me do.
All right, we're into chapter 5, and I think no truer words have been said here that Moses, or rather Pharaoh, didn't know. It didn't know the God of Israel.
Yeah,
it's a pretty big admission, I think. Pharaoh knew Joseph did. I think he was at least introduced to him, but not this Pharaoh. What about the phrase that we see, let my people go, or is it send my people out? We talked about this somewhat before, but the word of send, you recognize the word shalach there. You recognize shliach for like sent one, like Apostle Paul was be sent a sent one. The verb here is in the PL sense of the verb shalach, and it means with intensification. It's intensified form of the verb. So not to be being let go, but rather to be sent forcibly away. I think that's important to keep in mind.
So it's more along the lines of kick my people out.
Yeah, it's something that is not, it's not a passive thing. It's forceful. You'll know when it happens. You don't have a choice. And so this might have implications in our relationship with future pharaohs that will know that it's time to go, so to speak, when we don't have a choice in the matter. It's not going to be let my people go voluntarily, but you got to get out.
Yeah.
That was my last study slide. But now over to Dixie, who wants to know if there's any questions, because she is really tired. Yes.
Okay. They keep going on about how Pua and Shifram were actually Miriam and her mother, and I'm thinking, like, did they actually read the text? Because because like you read the text and what you get is because it says because they feared God, they were given families. And then 2 verses later, at the start of verse 1, chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Now a man of the family of Levi married a Levite woman." Very separate people. That makes it sound like not only are they separate people, but but he married the Levite woman after this had happened.
It's clarified in the next Torah portion that Amram married Yocheved, and that's who we're talking about. It clarifies in the next Torah portion. A better question in this case would be the 2 midwives that were questioned by Pharaoh. How did they get away with disobeying a command, lying about it, and be blessed by Adonai?
Because they were doing it to protect his people.
Does the Bible say you're allowed to lie and disobey commands?
Well, that's the thing. If they weren't Jewish and they were protecting the Jews, people who do that get blessed by God all the time.
The harlot who hid the...
Yeah, there's several examples.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
So we've done several studies on what carries more weight.
Right. They may have known who God was. They believed in God. They may not have known the law. So I mean, and that part of the law wasn't written down yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, even if they knew a little bit about it, it's we're doing this to protect his people.
Yeah, but as far as the midwives go, that's or the man of Levi married a daughter of Levi. That's clarified in the next Torah portion.
Right.
But I think,
but her thinking was that happened after.
It's not necessarily in chronological
Right, it's
order.
not necessarily in chronological order.
Yeah, and
But yeah.
Pua and what's her name?
Shifra.
Shifra and
It
Pua.
says that both of them got married, and had separate families.
And remember the thing.
Remember,
it was just a
verse 21.
commentary.
Since the midwives feared God, He gave them families.
Let's not confuse commentary with what the scriptures actually say.
That's what she said.
And you take it as a grain of salt.
She's disagreeing with commentary.
Yeah, and so do we. Miriam Moshe's sister? Honestly, I can't remember. I have to look that up.
Oh, I don't think it's ever mentioned.
Also, someone during the Holocaust trusted in God that He would take care of one of the Jewish people, even if she told them where they were. And then all those people got freed just after she had gotten sent to the place. So even people that don't lie, as long as they're trusting in God.
Oh, let's go ahead and pray. Father, thank you for allowing us to Midrash on your word this evening. Thank you for the blessings of your Torah to us, blessing of Mashiach to us. Father, we ask you to give us good weeks, there's a good week this coming week, and that you would continue to have us walk in your way. We thank you in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen. Shavua tov, everybody.